The first thing I noticed when I pulled up the gravel road was that the resort parking lot was full on a Tuesday afternoon in October. That didn't make sense. The ski lifts weren't even running yet. I stepped out of my truck and looked up at the wooden sign, Pine Ridge Mountain Resort. My Uncle Drew's name was still bolted up there underneath in faded paint. Owned and operated by Drew Gallagher. But Drew had passed away 5 years ago, and as of last week, this place was now legally mine. What I didn't expect was to find the resort operational. Kids were playing by the lodge fire pit. A couple was checking into one of the cabins. I watched a woman in a puffer vest take a key from a lockbox and disappear into Unit 3. I had one question running through my head. Who the hell was running my resort? I headed straight to the office. The front desk had a rusted bell and a laminated emergency contact. Karen Whitmore, HOA chairwoman. Just my luck. I was still trying to wrap my head around what HOA chairwoman had to do with my mountain resort when the door banged open, and in marched the woman herself, mid-50s, severe bob haircut, clipboard clutched like a weapon. "You can't park there," she barked, pointing outside. "That spot is reserved for HOA board members." I turned to face her. "I'm the owner," she blinked. "Excuse me?" "Name's Carson Gallagher. My uncle Drew Gallagher owned this place. He passed. I inherited it." Karen wrinkled her nose like I'd tracked in dog crap. "Well, Mr. Gallagher, I find that highly suspicious. This resort has been under the care of the Pine Ridge HOA since Drew's unfortunate absence." "Care?" I laughed. "You mean you've been running it?" She crossed her arms. "We've kept it from collapsing into disrepair. That gives us certain privileges. Like collecting rent." Her face twitched. "I saw the guests, the bookings. You've been renting out my cabins for 5 years." Karen hesitated. "The HOA board voted to temporarily assume management duties. Of course, the funds go toward maintenance, insurance, and community functions." I walked behind the desk and grabbed the ledger. "This says you've made over $300,000 in rental income since 2018. She tried to snatch it back. I held it high. "That's theft," I said. "I'm going to need every record, every receipt, and I want the keys to every cabin by tonight." Karen's eyes narrowed. "You have no idea what you're getting into, Mr. Gallagher. You might own the land, but the HOA owns the rules, and we don't take kindly to threats." I leaned in. "You're going to hate what I do next, then." I took the ledger, walked out, and drove down the hill to the sheriff's office. If Karen thought she could keep playing resort manager with my property, she was about to learn the hard way that I came prepared. I wasn't just some city guy with a windfall. I was a contractor with 20 years of legal contracts under my belt. And I was done letting someone like Karen Whitmore profit off my name. The sheriff's office was a squat brick building with a crooked flagpole out front, halfway between town and the base of Pine Ridge. Inside, Deputy Alana Cruz sat behind the counter, flipping through a file. She glanced up when I entered, cataloging me in half a second. Mud-caked boots, lodge dust on my jacket, eyes that hadn't blinked since I'd opened that ledger. "Help you?" she asked mildly. I dropped the book on the counter. "Deputy, I need to report financial misappropriation, unlawful property control, and possibly tax fraud. I've got 5 years' worth of rental income logged in their money collected by an HOA that never had legal authority to manage the property." She raised an eyebrow. "You're the Gallagher nephew. Looks like my reputation got here before I did." She opened the ledger, flipping through the columns. Her eyes narrowed as her finger traced the numbers. "They've been booking the cabins. Under what entity?" "Pine Ridge HOA. No license, no management agreement, and no probate court authorization. They moved in like vultures after my uncle died." She shut the book and stood. "Come with me." In a back room, the sheriff himself, Rick Mallory, a deliberate man with a face carved by high-altitude winters, was hunched over a county map. Alana handed him the ledger without a word. He skimmed it, expression tightening. "You got proof you're the legal heir?" he asked without looking up. I pulled out a folder and slid it over, probate documents, notarized statements, and the title transfer. He read every page before finally meeting my eyes. You planning to press charges? I want every cent back. And if they forged anything to keep this going, I want to see them in court. He nodded slowly. Then we'll start with a cease and desist. I'll get a deputy up there to shut down rentals pending an investigation. You'll need to file a civil suit for the back pay. But if we find falsified tax documents or forged county filings, that's criminal. I leaned forward. Check the county assessor's office. I'd bet they filed fake paperwork to claim temporary custodianship. Mallory handed the folder to Alana. Get records from the assessor's office and cross-check their filings since 2018. I want to know who signed what and when. As Alana left, he turned back to me. You'll also want to talk to the county zoning board. If they've been using the cabins commercially without a valid permit, that's another violation. I didn't need to be told twice. The zoning office was housed in a smaller building across the parking lot. Inside, a jittery clerk named Theo pulled the resort's file after a 10-minute search. He tapped a page near the back. See here. There's a conditional use permit issued in early 2019, signed by the HOA chairwoman, but it's not consistent with the original zoning ordinance. There's no indication it was ever approved by the Board of Supervisors. Who was the official listed as property owner on that permit? I asked. He leaned in. It says Community Trust Pine Ridge HOA. That's not a legal entity we recognize. I took a photo of the document. That's fraud. Theo looked alarmed but said nothing. Back in my truck, I drove straight up the mountain. The air had turned sharp and dry, the kind that creeps into your bones before the snow hits. When I pulled into the resort lot, 2 teenagers were unloading their bags near cabin 4. A handwritten welcome note was taped to the door, signed by management. I snapped a photo, then turned as a black SUV pulled in behind me. Deputy Cruz stepped out. She walked up to the guests first. I'm going to ask you to hold off checking in. This property is under an active investigation. They looked confused, but she was already moving toward the main lodge, one hand resting casually on her belt. Inside, Karen was rearranging brochures on the desk like nothing had happened. Karen Whitmore, Alana said calmly, I'm issuing a cease and desist on all commercial activity on this property, effective immediately. Karen stiffened. On what grounds? Unauthorized use of property, potential zoning violations, and misrepresentation of ownership. You'll need to provide all financial records, contracts, and tax filings related to Pine Ridge Resort operations within 72 hours. Karen's face flushed. This is outrageous. The HOA acted in the community's best interest. Your intentions aren't the issue, Alana replied. Your authority is. And unless you can produce legal documentation proving your right to manage this property, you're facing serious consequences. Karen's hands curled into fists on the counter. You have no idea what this place would look like if we hadn't stepped in. Pipes burst. Roofs caved. We paid out of pocket. I didn't look away. Then you should have billed the estate, not stolen the income. She didn't respond. That night, I stayed in the main lodge. I found the old office Drew used to use still smelled like cedar and old coffee. I booted up the ancient desktop, and to my surprise, it still worked. Inside the documents folder was a single file labeled HOA Agreement. I opened it, blank. No contract, no signatures, nothing to suggest Drew had ever given the HOA control of anything. I backed it up to a USB stick and called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Lee Raines, a real estate litigator out of Denver who'd handled cases like this before. We met in a diner halfway up the pass. She wore hiking boots, her laptop open before the waitress even brought coffee. This sounds like a classic overreach, she said, scanning the files I handed her. HOAs are notorious for stretching their authority, especially in places like this where oversight is thin. What's our angle? We file a civil suit for restitution every dollar they collected, plus damages. We also file a petition with the county to invalidate all permits issued under false authority. Once we push that, it opens them up to criminal liability for tax evasion, fraud, and possibly even racketeering. I sat back. You're saying this could go federal if there's wire fraud or misrepresentation in interstate bookings, yes. And with the sheriff already involved, we've got the foundation. The next morning, court filings went out. By noon, subpoenas were served to the HOA board. I watched from my truck as servers handed envelopes to each member, 4 of them, all looking like they'd just been told the mountain was about to fall on them. But Karen, she wasn't shaken, she was furious. That afternoon, I found a note taped to the lodge door. It read, HOA emergency meeting tonight, attendance mandatory, resort future at stake. I tore it down. At 7, I parked outside the community center just downhill from the resort. Inside, the board sat at the long table like they owned the place. Karen stood at the podium speaking into a mic. Due to recent interference by parties claiming ownership, the board must vote on protective measures to maintain continuity of operations. Someone in the crowd raised a hand. Is it true we never had the legal right to rent those cabins? Karen's jaw tightened. That's being handled. I stepped into the aisle. It's already handled. You committed fraud. Gasps echoed down the rows. I walked to the front and dropped a copy of the zoning permit on the table. Filed under a fake trust, not approved through the county. And every one of you signed it. Karen reached for the mic. This is a disruption. No, this is a reckoning. I turned to the crowd. You've all been lied to, told your HOA was protecting the resort. But they were collecting money under false pretenses, spending it without oversight and filing fake documents to keep it going. That's not stewardship, that's theft. Silence. Then someone stood up in the back. It was an older man with a weathered face and a cane. I paid dues for 5 years thinking it went to trail maintenance and snow removal. You used it to line your pockets, another voice. Where's the money, Karen? And another. I never voted to manage the resort. Karen backed away from the podium. I didn't say another word. I didn't need to. The community had seen enough. Outside, as the parking lot cleared, Lee called. The county just voided every permit issued by the HOA since 2019. You've got full control, Carson. And the DA's office wants to talk. I looked up at the mountain, its peaks catching the last orange light of the day. They'd used my uncle's legacy like their personal ATM. Now it was my turn. The crisp air outside the community center was quiet, but the tension hadn't left with the crowd. Lights from nearby cabins flickered like distant campfires. I stood by my truck, arms crossed, watching Karen emerge alone. Her board had scattered, some ducking into cars, others disappearing on foot. She paused when she saw me, then walked over, slower than before. You think you've won, she said, her voice low. I think I've exposed a fraud, I replied, her jaw tensed. You're not from here, you don't understand what this place needs. I didn't answer. I just opened my truck door and climbed in. By morning, the first email from Lee had landed. Carson, check this out. Financial anomalies go deeper than rentals. HOA board used the resort's revenue to secure a revolving line of credit under a shell LLC. Name on the paperwork, Pine Ridge Community Fund. No IN, no registration at the state level. We've got bank transfers but no traceable business entity behind them. This is serious. I forwarded the file straight to the DA's office. Within hours, subpoenas followed. That evening, I met with Lee at the lodge. She'd driven up from Denver again, laptop open, tabs multiplying like wildfire. They used your uncle's death as cover, she said, scrolling. Filed an emergency custodial petition under the guise of community stabilization, but the judge never signed off. It was submitted, but no ruling. That means they acted without judicial authority. They just assumed control, I said, pacing, like squatters with a clipboard. Worse. They applied for a state grant 2 years ago, community revitalization funds. Claimed they were renovating the resort for low-income access to wilderness retreats. I stopped. They got state money, $42,000, dispersed to the same Pine Ridge Community Fund account. And it disappeared within 6 months. Where'd it go? That's what the forensic accountant is working on now. That night, I walked the perimeter of the property, flashlight in hand. I passed cabin 10 and noticed something strange. The back door had a new keypad lock. Not the kind installed by my uncle, not even the same style. I took a picture and made a note. The next morning, Deputy Cruz met me outside the lodge. "Need you to come down to the station," she said. "We've got something." We drove in silence down the winding hill. At the station, she guided me to the back, where Sheriff Mallory was reviewing security footage on a dusty monitor. He gestured me over. "Last month," he said. "Take a look." The footage showed Karen parking behind the lodge after dark. She used a key to enter, then emerged 40 minutes later carrying a locked cash box and a thick file folder. "That folder," Mallory said, pausing the video, "matches the description of what you reported missing from the office safe." I nodded slowly. She said she was keeping records safe. That folder had my uncle's original tax documents, ownership receipts, even a letter from a local lender freezing an old loan. She had no right to remove it, Mallory said, and that cash box, we've confirmed it wasn't logged in the HOA's accounts. He handed me a copy of the warrant. "We're searching her house today." By sunset, Karen's 2-story home on the East Ridge had been turned inside out. The county IT team took her hard drives. A safe was hauled out under chain of custody. Inside, the missing cash box, empty, but the big break came from her laptop. "We found encrypted folders," Lee told me over the phone, her voice tight. "One of them was cracked by our forensic guy, Carson. It's a ledger, a hidden one. Side payments, deposits into a personal account at a credit union in Utah." I didn't speak. She was funneling money out of state. Close to $98,000 over 4 years. That night I sat with the sheriff on the lodge porch, wood crackling in the fire pit beside us. He didn't say much, just handed me a folder. "DA's filing felony charges," he said. "Wire fraud, tax evasion, theft by deception, tampering with public records. She's looking at 15 years, maybe more." "She'll negotiate," I said. "She'll offer restitution in exchange for a lighter sentence," he nodded. "Maybe, but the state grant complicates things. That's public money. And the feds are circling." I stared at the empty cabins, all dark now, no guests, no laughter, just cold windows and silence. "Did you know her?" I asked. "Karen," Mallory leaned back. "She used to run the town library, organized, sharp, but something changed after your uncle died. Power does strange things to people when no one's watching." The next day, I called a meeting, not a secret HOA affair, but a public town hall. Flyers went out, people showed up. Not just resort neighbors, but folks from town, business owners, former guests, people who remembered Drew. I stood at the front, no podium, just a marked-up blueprint of the resort tacked to the wall behind me. "I'm reopening the lodge," I told them. "But not the way it was. No more hidden fees, no false boards, no skimming off the top. We'll run it as a cooperative. Local hires. Transparent books. And every cabin will have a name, not a number. People remember names." A man in the second row raised his hand. Wore a fleece jacket with the county emblem. "You gonna need permits for all that?" "I've already applied," I said, "and the county's waiving fees for the first year." Turns out cleaning up corruption earns goodwill. A woman near the back stood. "You keeping the trails open to the public?" I nodded. "Your kids walked those trails before the HOA put up signs. We're taking the signs down." There was no applause. Just a quiet shift, the kind of silence that comes when people finally believe they're being heard. Afterward, as I shook hands and listened to stories about my uncle I'd never heard before, Lee pulled me aside. "There's one more thing," she said. "We found an unsigned deed transfer in the safe. Dated 3 months after your uncle died. Someone tried to transfer the property into the HOA's name retroactively." "Who?" The signature line's blank, but the notary stamp is a fake, printed from a template. That's forgery. More charges. Federal this time. Interstate intent to defraud. The FBI's already reviewing it. I stepped outside into the cold. The mountain loomed above, quiet and steady. For the first time, it felt like it belonged to me not just on paper, but in the way the wind moved through the trees. The resort wasn't just a property anymore. It was proof. Proof that a small group of people could be undone by truth, by law, and by those who refused to be silent. And I wasn't finished yet. The cabins would be restored. The trails would welcome hikers again, and every ledger, every booking, every dollar would be accounted for, open for anyone to see. Justice wasn't just something you demanded. It was something you rebuilt, piece by piece, where the damage had been hidden longest. The first snow came early that year, dry and wind-blown, dusting the mountain in white like a warning. I stood on the porch of Cabin 7, watching the flakes gather on the railing while inside, a state auditor rifled through stacks of confiscated HOA documents. He didn't look up when I stepped in, just kept flipping pages and marking tabs with thin yellow post-its. These bank transfers, he said, were rerouted through 3 different accounts, all within the last 18 months. The trail stops at a firm in Nevada that doesn't actually exist. Shell company, I asked. No, phantom account. Someone burned a trail. This was intentional. A week earlier, the district attorney had expanded the investigation. What began as a local fraud case had grown teeth. Evidence recovered from Karen's laptop, and the safe revealed not just misappropriated funds, but a coordinated effort to conceal the theft across multiple jurisdictions. Once the state grant money was flagged as misused, the Office of Inspector General got involved. Things escalated fast. Now the resort was swarming with officials, accountants, and tech specialists. Every ledger, every email, every cabin contract was under scrutiny. And still, the worst part hadn't come out yet, not until the sheriff called me back into his office and showed me the sealed envelope. "Anonymous tip," he said, "came in this morning, addressed to you." I slid the contents onto the desk, a single flash drive and a note typed in block letters. Ask what happened to Cabin 9's guest records. February 3 years ago. Mallory inserted the drive into his desktop and opened a video file. There was no audio, just grainy security footage from the main lodge. Timestamp: February 23rd, 3 years prior. A man in ski gear entered the lobby holding a duffel bag. His face was partially visible when he pulled off his goggles, mid-40s, dark beard, red jacket. He approached the counter, spoke briefly to someone off camera, then followed them down the hall. "Who's that?" I asked. Mallory paused the video. "That's what we're trying to find out." No check-in records exist for that night, and Cabin 9, he pulled a second file from his drawer, reported a fire that same weekend. Small one, electrical, but the repair records were unusual. He handed me the report. The work order had been signed off by a contractor I'd never heard of. The invoice came from a business that didn't exist anymore. There was no itemized list, just a vague note. Damage contained, no structural concerns. I set the file down. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying someone came up here under the radar, something went wrong, and the HOA buried it. And if there's no guest record, no ID, no paper trail, we might be looking at more than theft." A week later, we had a name. The man in the video was identified as Alan Riley, a federal whistleblower who disappeared under sealed circumstances during an open investigation into a regional land development firm. He'd been under witness protection. The date of his disappearance matched the night he'd checked into the resort. I met with Lee and a federal agent from the Department of Justice on a snowy Tuesday afternoon inside the newly reopened community center. The agent, a tall man named Keene, laid out the sequence of events like he was unpacking a crime scene. Riley was staying off-grid until a scheduled deposition, he explained. His handler arranged for a remote location, quiet, secure. The HOA approved the booking directly through a back-channel account, no standard reservation. And then he vanished, Lee said. After that, Keene continued, we lost all contact. His phone pinged once more here, then nothing. The case was frozen due to lack of physical evidence until your tip came in. I looked at Lee. They used the resort as a black site. Not officially, Keene said. But someone within the HOA knew who he was, knew what he was hiding, and helped make sure that whatever he knew never made it to court. The entire room shifted. This wasn't just about money anymore. The DOJ built a timeline. The funds stolen from resort operations had been partially redirected to pay off private security contractors' names scrubbed. Licenses expired. Some traced to firms that had previously worked in overseas conflict zones. One individual, tied to a former board member, had been placed under federal surveillance. Karen, now in custody, refused to speak. Her attorney made vague threats about cooperation, then stopped responding altogether once the federal indictments were filed. I was called to testify before a grand jury a month later. Inside a low-ceilinged courtroom in Denver, I presented everything: the forged permits, the fake trust, the missing guest records, the falsified repair logs. I handed over photos, emails, and the notarized deed with the counterfeit stamp. The prosecutors asked their questions with surgical precision. The jury listened stone-faced. When it was over, I walked outside into the cold and called Lee. "They're charging her with conspiracy to obstruct a federal investigation," I said. "Among other things." "She'll flip," Lee replied. "They always do when prison gets real." And she did. Karen entered a plea deal within 2 weeks. In exchange for a reduced sentence, she agreed to name every HOA board member involved, provide access to encrypted storage, and testify in court. Her confession was 43 pages long. It detailed how the HOA had been approached by a third-party fixer promising funding for the resort in exchange for special accommodations. They'd accepted. The fixer was later identified as a contractor linked to a now-defunct defense procurement group. He was arrested in Nevada. The resort was cleared of all federal entanglements by early spring. I spent the following months rebuilding not just the buildings, but the trust. Cabin 9 was gutted and redone from scratch. We held a dedication ceremony for Alan Riley, planting a pine tree outside the cabin in his name. His family, who had never received answers, finally got closure. The resort reopened on the first day of June. We didn't call it Pine Ridge anymore. That name had been stained too deeply. We renamed it Gallinger Pines in honor of Drew, the man who'd built it, trusted people to do right by it, and never imagined how far they'd go to corrupt it. The cooperative launched with 20 community members, each with a defined stake and a transparent vote. We set up quarterly town reviews, open books, and a zero-tolerance policy for concealed dealings. Lee helped us draft the bylaws. Sheriff Mallory joined as an advisory board member. Even Theo, the zoning clerk, came aboard as treasurer. As for me, I kept the same cabin my uncle had lived in. Refinished the deck. Replaced the old stove. On quiet mornings, I'd sit with coffee and watch the mist roll down the mountain, knowing every inch of this place had been reclaimed honestly, legally, and with grit. The final settlement awarded me back the full rental income with interest. The state grant was repaid in full through the liquidation of HOA assets. The rest, it went into rebuilding the community center, restoring the trails, and creating a scholarship fund for local kids studying environmental science or hospitality. Justice wasn't a clean line. It had jagged edges, long delays, and moments where the whole thing felt like it might unravel. But in the end, it held. They'd stolen 5 years of income, stained my family's name, and nearly turned a mountain into a lie. Now they owed me, and they paid.